Today, Catherine and I are talking about why meditate in essence and why meditation is a little deeper than mindfulness.
So much better.
And so much better than just mindfulness. And we've just finished here a 2-week retreat on 6 yogas, esoteric Tibetan practice. And the studio audience are all the meditators who have just finished that 2-week retreat. And so they're all convinced that they need to meditate and don't need just mindfulness. And so we're preaching to the converted, which is why we invited them. They're on our side.
Well, there are so many aspects to the spiritual life, and we, depending on what's happening with us and at our center and in our communities, we focus on different ones. Conscious community, Sangha, the community of spiritual practitioners, is one we like to focus on. And today we're going to talk, as Sensei said, about the value of meditation. And by that we mean formal sitting meditation, as compared to, say, mindfulness, which is also, of course, wonderful and very valuable. And it's exciting that it's becoming more and more mainstream. And it's just not the same thing as meditation. So we want to talk a little bit about why and the difference between them. Well, mindfulness is really necessary because our daily lives are generally quite full. And by bringing mindfulness to them, we introduce spaciousness into our daily lives, and then we don't start hyperventilating because they're so full, right? We can bring our practice, our spiritual practice, into everything that we do. And that's awesome. That's the upside of mindfulness. And it can be easy, because our lives are so full, to then end up not really meditating so much. And I'm as challenged by this as anybody. You know, if we have a formal practice, a daily practice, they can get shorter and shorter, or further and further between. And our retreats can get shorter and shorter and longer spaces between them. And after meditating for 20 years, I can really honestly say that when I do a retreat, I just finished a month-long retreat, I'm just eternally amazed and astonished at the states that are only accessible to me after 20 years of meditation in a long retreat. And how much that practice, how much that access to those states nourishes and enriches the rest of my life. Every retreat I think, oh my gosh, I don't want to do without this, because it's so valuable and so rare. If I don't take the time, then I don't have those experiences. And I'm talking about retreat time here, which is basically why we founded this retreat center, is to be able to do longer retreats.
So the studio audience is taking notes, I see. You people on the internet don't have to take notes if you don't want to. Just kidding. Fundamentally, the difference between mindfulness and meditation is mindfulness is largely awareness about what's happening to you in your environment when you're in it. And meditation is more about what you're aware of inside yourself when the environment is not so central. So in mindfulness practice, I'm aware that Richard is writing with his pen and he's right-handed and he's wearing black. That's a mindfulness practice. But meditation is when I stand back from the sensory data and I go inside myself and watch how I experience what I'm aware of. And the reason that this is so important is because we're alone. As an individual, around 2 years of age, we become an ego and we become separate people. And once we become separate people, we're on our own. We fundamentally live alone and die alone inside our own heads, and nobody has access to that except us, other than through our mirror neurons, which allows us to empathize and kind of read what's going on in someone else, and that's fine. But inside our own experience, we have our own feelings, we have our own sensations, we have our own thoughts, and that separates us. And for the ego, the ultimate terror is separation. So when you meditate, when you're practicing mindfulness, you're still an ego. You're still kind of me aware of Sarah with her hat, or me aware of Kara on the computer. But when you go to meditation, you remove yourself, you pull yourself back from just witnessing the phenomena to witnessing the mind that witnesses the phenomena. And when you start looking at the nature of the phenomena that you're experiencing internally, as well as externally, you move from mindfulness to meditation. And this is the only cure for loneliness. This is the only way to transcend the separation of the ego, is to move beyond it. And to do that, you have to meditate.
Yeah, I just want to highlight it. I just wanted to highlight that link that you made between the ego fears separation, because it's so vulnerable, right? If we're by ourselves, we can't survive as an organism if we're by ourselves. And we rely on the people who install the ATM machines, right? We rely on the people who stock the grocery store. And I wanted to make that link between that fear of separation and the epidemics of loneliness that have become so common. And Sartre said other people are hell. And maybe people can relate to that a little bit. Maybe it can be challenging to be with other people, so we get our own apartment, we get our own car, we get our own, so we can control the space, basically. So the ego is simultaneously trying to be in as much control as possible, which means separating, then fearing this separation, and then suffering terribly from the results of that, from loneliness. And so meditation is a way of intentionally being separate. My father likes to say, when I go into solitary retreat for a month, he said, "Catherine, I hate to tell you this, but for centuries that's been punishment to people." And it's true, right? So we do this voluntarily so that we can watch all of these things that come up, including fear and anxiety around separation and loneliness, and see how much of it is generated by our own minds.
Right. So on that basis, one of the big fears of the ego is abandonment. So that has to do with the external environment. If I'm abandoned by my friends or abandoned by my parents, if I'm abandoned by my parents when I'm young, I'm dead. If I'm abandoned by my friends or my environment, I'm lonely, but I can survive, right? But you don't really meet the fear of annihilation, other than being killed by somebody, until you go inside. And when you go inside and you see that the ego's root fear is annihilation, the fear of being wiped out, the fear of disappearing, you see how the ego then works so hard to keep involved and engaged, so hard to keep involved and engaged. Keep it busy, get through the day, keep it busy, get through the day. And control. And manipulating to always keep itself in the game. So from the minute we get up in the morning till the minute we go to bed at night, it's me, 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 me. It's how I think, it's how I feel, it's what I sense. Now there's no peace there. There's no peace to be found, there's no contentment to be found. And fundamentally, while there's temporary bliss to be found in terms of the drugs that are in our system, like dopamine and so on, we can get the hit, but it doesn't last. It's temporary, it moves through. So there's no real security for the sense of self in the ego constructs, because they're impermanent, they're transient, they're subject to loss, and they're out of our control, really. So the only place you can find peace and real bliss and real clarity and real contentment is when you go past the ego, and it's very, very hard to do that in the world, because everything about the world is about interacting egos. So when you meditate, you start to experience your processing internally, which is one step closer to home. So that's mindfulness, when you can be aware of what you're aware of when you're aware of it. But to be aware of the thing that's aware is meditation. And that then starts to take you past the ego, takes you into a place where the ego can rest or relax, because it's not needed. And you can enter in this altered space, kind of altered states of consciousness, which we call jhana in meditation, or absorptions. Or you can understand that process. You can start to see how the interaction works between me and other in the environment, and that's called insight, when I start to understand how these things connect. So between the insight, right, which is an understanding, and the bliss emptiness, which is a feeling, you then have this meditative space, which is why people meditate, I think.
So if we look closely, we can see that despite all our efforts to the contrary, the only person that we can change is ourselves, or to be meditationally technical, our non-self. So we've tried, right? We've tried to change other people. We've believed that we can do it. We've committed, and it, as far as I can tell, it just does not seem to be possible. Has anybody found differently? Right? Anybody have any success changing somebody else?
Not yet, but we're
not,
working.
Not yet. We're
not
still
yet,
trying,
but
maybe.
We're working on it.
And this is why it's so important. We have to know what we are bringing to every situation, right? Because we're the only ones that we can change. And if we change what we're bringing to any situation, then the entire mandala changes, right? So if we want to change a situation, if we want to help other people to change, then we just change ourselves, and it will all shift. We don't necessarily know how it will shift, but we can be sure that it will shift. And so we need to understand, as Sensei's describing, what are our thought patterns, what are our emotional patterns, what are our physical patterns that we're bringing to any situation. And really the only way to, well, it's like layers of an onion. Every time we go into a retreat, we have realizations about, I didn't really see how I was doing that, how I'm carrying this around with me all of the time. And then believing that it's other people. You know, how come everyone I know does X? Well, obviously I'm carrying X around with me, and so that's what everyone encounters, and that's what everyone is responding to. So in meditation we see this more clearly, and then we can invite space around whatever this pattern is. If we don't see it, there's no spaciousness there. And we realize that we have choices, that we can choose to not manifest these patterns, choose to manifest other patterns. And that choices brings freedom, and that's why we call it spiritual liberation.
So we can,
freedom!
yay, freedom. So we can switch.
Why should
we
Hindis
can
have
flip,
all the fun?
Yeah, we can flip on this one. I just come at it from the other end now. And why don't people meditate? Why don't we meditate? Well, fundamentally, the reason we don't meditate is because we live on habit. We live on our routines. And as soon as our routines are interrupted, we get nervous. So meditation, if you're not already established in a meditation practice, is an interruption to your habit pattern of whatever it is. So it's not that meditation is uncomfortable or unpleasant, we just don't like doing it because it's interfering with our habit patterns. And our self, our sense of self, is deeply, deeply rooted into our habit patterns. So mindfulness is a really easy approach to it. I'm mindful of my habit pattern. Hey, that's fantastic. I'm mindful of my habit that I'm drinking coffee. I'm just going to keep drinking coffee. I'm mindful about that, right? But I'm not interfering with the habit. The habit's running, and habits are very low levels of mindfulness. I mean, in half the time, we're not even mindful at all. We're absent-minded. We're in the habit, it's running itself. So the reason we have a hard time getting to the meditation cushion, or the reason it's a hard time to meditate, is because it's interfering with habits, interferes with myself. If it interferes with myself, it makes me anxious and makes me feel more aware of my loneliness and my separation, therefore I won't do it. I'll go shovel the sidewalk. Right? Even if it doesn't need it, to keep that habit in place. With mindfulness, we say, okay, well, the problem with this habit,
or social media, or fill in
or
the
social
blank.
media, or fill in the blank. So the problem with habits, of course, is a very low level of mindfulness, and it hides the underlying structure of the ego, which is its separation and its isolation. So you don't notice it. So the minute your habit is interrupted, the isolation of the egos, the loneliness of the ego in its environment is brought right to the front. So most people run back to their habit to bury that. But there's no freedom by hiding. You can run, but you cannot hide, right? So there's no freedom from that. So we meditate in order to find true freedom, which is break the habit pattern, or give the habit a break, and practice awareness about the habit. That makes us distinctly uncomfortable because it brings forth our loneliness, it brings forth our separation, it brings forth our isolation. as an ego. This is why it's hard to meditate. You get in touch with that, you actually get a certain amount of release. At least you know the problem, right? You get release, but it still interferes with the self. So you go back to the habit. So this dialogue goes on for years. Habit, a little bit of meditation, back to habit, back to habit, back to habit. Now, with mindfulness, you go, okay, well, if I want to really establish a place where I am at peace, I need to go past the habit, past the mindfulness, and past the sense of the self. So the big part of meditation is understanding that this self, which we labor and toil endlessly in order to support and promote and defend and erect and build and hold and run our lives with, doesn't actually exist in the way we think it does. It's a program. It's a running program. So what happens in meditation is you start to see...
An operating system?
Operating system. You start to see that the self is an operating system, not the ground of being. And this is where you start to access altered states of consciousness and altered ways of experiencing life that are much more peaceful and much more blissful and much more spacious and much more calm and much more bright than the ego can ever find on its own.
That's what's behind the operating system.
Behind the OS. OS Doug. And behind OS Doug is, yeah, we call it no thing.
So this is, of course, not news. The world's wisdom traditions have been describing these exalted states for as long as written human history has existed and before. And so these states are available to anyone who is willing to commit the time and the energy to, I was going to say go looking for them, but it's really more about learning to open up to them, which is why Islam means surrender. And this is where, and it takes meditation to be able to learn how to let go of the operating system, or see the operating system, right? Learn to relax it so that we can perceive what's beyond that. And we believe it's every human's birthright. And why settle for kind of running around with a little ego? That can also be fun. You know, nothing against regular life. It's also good. And so much more meaningful when we have access to this cosmic consciousness.
Let's assume for the moment that you've experienced this transcendental ing. It's a, what do you call that, a gerund? Gerund?
Being.
I-N-G. This transcendental experience. So now, arguably, I mean not arguably, but...
Right, because it's not a fixed state, it's always
right,
in flux.
It's in flux. So now you're dwelling in this peaceful, blissful, spacious clarity, and it feels? Good. It feels better than good. It's the best feeling you're ever going to have in life. And there's an automatic response, because you're a human being, is to share it. Human beings are what they are because they share. This is how we have become who we are, through sharing, through interaction. So the natural tendency of the human being, now that it's free from personal suffering, or at least temporarily, is to share it. So then you go back out, right? You come back out of this altered state of consciousness, sort of, kind of.
Or meditation retreat.
Right, or meditation retreat, and you take it back to the world. Now eventually you can carry them both simultaneously, but maybe not initially.
Takes
So
some practice.
It takes some practice. So you come back in the world, your job now is to share it. So that's an act of compassion. Because you're in a good state, because you're in a state of bliss, clarity, non-clinging, your automatic human response is to share it. So that's the compassion part of it. The compassion part of it is by sharing this good state with somebody who's not in a good state, hopefully that person gets in a good state and everybody's problems get less. That's in it in a nutshell. So the process now...
Is that the Bodhisattva vow in a nutshell?
That's the Bodhisattva vow in a nutshell. Help
dedicate
people out.
all one's energy for the benefit of all beings.
Exactly. So now the big problem becomes, how do I share it? And this is now then where the interface between meditation and karma yoga comes into place, or meditation and service, or meditation and the bodhisattva vow. It's how do I share this? And how can I talk to people in a way that they can hear it and be attracted and pulled into the space to meet their life more fully, in this sense, right? So there's people are doers. So we approach them where they are, which is in the doing, the karma yoga and the service. Then from there into the meditation, and then back out to the service, right? And then this forms your community, the community of meditation, the community of karma yoga, service, compassionate action in the world. Where it gets tricky...
Where does it get tricky?
Well, I'll tell you where it gets tricky is in the dialogue between the experience of the meditation space and the world at large with people and their egos. And so this then is a constant dialogue back and forth between your meditation and your interaction with the world to learn how to be more compassionate. But you need the contact with that space in order to share. Otherwise,
that takes so much skill, right?
Does.
Which is why the community is so important, because where are we going to learn those skills?
Exactly. And if you're just sharing, thank you. And if you're just sharing from the point of view of the ego, then you're not sharing that space. You're sharing habit. If I'm just sharing from my ego mind, I'm just sharing from my separated, isolated being. My separated, isolated being to her separated, isolated back. If we're just sharing from ego level. But if we're sharing from emptiness, spacious, bliss, clarity, non-clinging, etc., altered state level, then we're sharing at core. So then whatever problems happen between the two egos are much more resolvable. But without that underlying foundation
of emptiness,
spaciousness, love,
spaciousness,
compassion.
You're using all those terms as synonyms?
Yeah.
Okay. And where we cultivate our ability to keep one foot in emptiness at all times, spaciousness at all times, is in retreat, because that takes practice. Because it is possible to lose that contact at any given time. So that's why we call it meditation practice. Okay, can I stay in emptiness? Can I stay in emptiness? Can I stay in emptiness?
So we're calling 2020 the year of meditation, because it seems to us that more and more people are spending more and more time running around like chickens with their heads off, chasing the ego formations, chasing the consumption markets, chasing social media, chasing relationships, chasing profit.
Contemporary life, that's part of contemporary life, that's the culture nowadays, right? Is people feeling like they can't afford to take time off to do long retreats. That's I think, an unwholesome belief system that is permeating our culture at the time being, rather than, I will benefit a lot from doing a longer retreat, and I'll be able to bring those benefits back to my relationships, my career, my community.
And by extension, not being able to take time off from your work to do service for your community, or to connect with other people at this level, because you don't have time. I'm too busy taking care of my life, which is not going to produce the result you're after. You're going to just end up more and more isolated in that.
I'm busy.
But it's a habit, and it's the structure, and it's the way the society is informing you, and that's what they're telling you, and they're convincing you of it, that you're alone, and you got to make your own way, and you got to be me, and I got to make it happen. And then we go to community, and I don't have time for Nuno's project or whatever. I got to get mine on and get done, otherwise I'm going to die. I'm going to be annihilated. It's a competitive world. It's a global market. We're all in trouble. The world's going to end. And it's all looking that way because of our isolate. The isolate ego multiplied by 7 billion. And if we're going to change it, we got to start thinking of the community of 7 billion and reducing it. But nevertheless, the community of humanity is more important than one more television set. And you won't get there unless you meditate, because the meditation shows you the interconnection of life is what makes us humans really powerful, not our isolate. And the meditation is a really good way to do that. Karma yoga is the other good way to do it. Service, and then community involvement, wherever you can slot in.
I've been an environmentalist pretty much my whole adult life, and I was really shocked one meditation retreat to realize that I was a part of this ecosystem. And I was shocked that I was shocked. How could I be an environmentalist for all these years and not think of myself as a part of the ecosystem that I'm in? Well, the answer
Do you
to that...
mean the physical or the people?
Yes, both.
Both.
Right? If I am, then everybody is. Well, the reasons are kind of obvious, but maybe worth going into. Like, we travel a lot, so my connection with the ecosystem changes, right? The ecosystem changes, right? And a lot of the people here will be leaving soon, so we're all part of the same ecosystem today and won't be tomorrow, right? Or will be part of a bigger ecosystem tomorrow. So a lot of these natural, these things that I think people of hundreds of years ago knew deep in their bones because it was so clear, we don't know anymore. We don't have those connections, which is another reason retreat centers are so often set in nature.
Well, and the downstream problems, like the big world problems, are results of this the isolated ego. It leads to environmental degradation. It leads to rampant limbic capitalism. It leads to kind of the huger difference between rich and poor.
And so we need this time to go inside, to reflect, to be in nature, to learn how to repair these connections so that we can begin to provide alternatives to the contemporary challenges we're all facing, like climate change, because that can't be theory. You know, someone could say to me, you're part of this ecosystem, and I'd say, oh yes, of course that's true. But if I don't feel that in my organism, if I don't know that to be true deeply inside, then it's just another head trip I'm carrying around with me. And this takes meditation.
In order to understand the connection with this one, you have to remember that when the Tibetans, when you request to go into a 3-year retreat in Vajrayana Buddhism, they ask you why. Why are you doing that? Why do you want to do that? And most people would say, probably from our world, to escape, to get out of here, to get out of this.
I need a break.
I need a break, to get out of this thing. That would not be grounds for you to be accepted into a 3-year retreat, right? The reason you get accepted into a 3-year retreat is not to escape from the world, but it's to be able to contact with the world more fully.
Ooh.
That's got to be your motivation. Your motivation has to be, I need to be more clear, I need to be more awake, I need to be more integrated in order to be of better service. And then you can do a 3-year retreat, not to escape. So meditation is not an escape. A lot of people think that, I'm escaping from my problems. No, you're not. You're getting a perspective on them that gives you a perspective that you didn't otherwise have so that you can return to the world.
It's not escape and it's not rehab.
And it's not rehab.
Those are side benefits. We do feel revitalized. We do experience healing.
Should we take some
And
questions?
it's about moving forward. It's about stepping in. It's about experiencing more deeply.
Exactly.
Questions? Sure.
Questions? Anybody got a question? No questions? We leave.
Yeah, I was wondering the mindfulness. Where should I be going?
That's great.
Okay. I was wondering the mindfulness in the traditional text is more like what you described as meditation. People would go to the forest and practice seriously. So I just wondered if you could say more when you talk about mindfulness in this context. What do you mean?
Yeah. Well, I think basically, Duncan, the mindfulness as a term has been, preempted? What's the word?
Co-opted?
Co-opted, thank you. Mindfulness as a word has been co-opted from the meditation tradition and is used now in a kind of an office or a business or a worldly sense of helping people to be more functional in their jobs. They've co-opted the word mindfulness. Mindfulness would initially be meditation. So we don't have a problem with that. You want to call it mindfulness, that's fine. But then we'll change the word mindfulness in terms of meditation to intentional awareness rather than just awareness, like an awareness of awareness. Would that be meta-learning?
Awareness of awareness, perhaps. Meta-learning is learning about the process of learning.
So
awareness about the process of awareness is meditation, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah, meta-meditation.
Meta-meditation.
Things like lower stress and higher productivity and better relationships are results of meditation, and those are really awesome results. But from our point of view, those are byproducts. Those are just a few of the really uncountable byproducts of meditation. So we are encouraging mindfulness practitioners or meditators not to have that be the end goal, because there's bigger and better things that await us, such as the alleviation of suffering, the alleviation of suffering of all beings.
Maybe an image?
Sure.
So think of it as a party. Everybody goes to a party in a bad state. Or everybody goes to a party in a great state. If everybody goes to a party in a great state, what kind of party are you going to have? So if the purpose is the great party, the purpose isn't the great party. The purpose is the great state. If you're in a great state and you go to a party, you have a great party, right? If you want a great party but you go in a bad state, good luck. So we're saying the great state is meditation and the party is mindfulness. Maybe. Any other questions?
Yes. And people online are welcome to ask
And people
questions
online
also.
are welcome.
I was just wondering, sorry, if you could say a bit more about rehab. It's not rehab. This wasn't clear what you meant by that.
Oh, yes. Well, as a meditation center, people can arrive really bedraggled. And part of it's if you travel from a long ways away to get here and you've been on several airplanes, that will make one bedraggled. But there's a kind of, I've been kind of abusing my organism and my consciousness and my practice all year, but I knew I was going to do this retreat, so I thought it was okay. Now I'm here to be fixed or healed, right? So we've been really, so the idea with retreat, we talked about stepping into the experience of this amazing thing called life more, experiencing it more fully, going into it more deeply. So when we do, say this is a 2-week meditation retreat and we come out in a better state. So the idea is not to go back to our daily grind and just do what we were doing before until our state degrades and then go back to retreat and basically stay on the same level all the time, average out. But the idea is to experience higher states of consciousness, take that out in the world, apply it, share it, do another retreat, experience a higher level of consciousness, take it back to one's life, experience it, share it.
Yeah, we assume that the problem of the ego, its separation and isolation, what keeps it in place is attachment, clinging to things that are connected with greed, hatred, and delusion. So if I'm greedy for 6 quarts of booze every night, rehab would be to cut it down to 1 or like half, you know what I mean? Less, a lot less. So rehab would be cutting it down. So in terms of if I'm greedy for money and I learn that rehab is that money is not what I'm really interested in, what I'm really interested in love, and so now I go around loving everybody, which is a good thing, that would be rehab. But the loving is still based on my idea of me being the lover, right? So that's not meditation. Meditation goes a step farther and goes behind the I that's loving and recognizing that love is what created the I in the first place. Love isn't something the I gets or goes and buys or discovers. It's something that was always there. So this is back into the meditation again. So meditation can include, as Catherine said, meditation can include rehab, or rehab can be a downstream result of meditation, right? But it's not rehab itself.
So with a retreat, with a retreat, we do feel refreshed, we do feel revitalized, we do feel we've had a break from our daily life. And again, those are byproducts. That's not the intention of a retreat. And we can kind of confuse retreat with break time, or that's the escape you were talking about.
So we're up on our half hour. What do we do, Cara? Do we get out of here? Or do we take another question?
If there's a question, if you want to take it.
Is there anything online?
There's not one online right now.
All
Maybe
right.
you could talk about the Insight Retreat.
Well, hang on. Is there any other questions? Insight Retreat, just come do it. I'm not going to talk about it. Just come do it. We talk about meditation for frickin' ever. So there's a point where you just come and do it. So either come and meditate or go away.
This meditation retreat in April is on the 16 stages of insight. So it's can be very helpful to understand the map of consciousness, what is happening to us when we're meditating. It's a universal experience, right? Many people have had it, many people have mapped it, and we learn the map. And quite awesome. And then 16 Buddha body practice in
December. Which
December.
But yeah, that's about really going out into space, as it were. Seeing alternative bodies. Anyway, we'll get there in December.
Using meditation as a tool to explore the nature of consciousness.
Inhabiting form.
Inhabiting form.
Anyway, there's a tendency in the society to pamper the ego too much and indulge it. And it's time for our civilization to grow up and realize there's work to be done. If you want to heal your planet, you start with you. If you start with you, you can spread it out. And meditation and therapy / karma yoga / service are 2 or 4, whatever, great ways of doing it. Maybe actually the only way to do it. So come meditate. Any other questions?
You're mentioning the beyond mindfulness, I believe, more from the states kind of side of things, and I just was curious if there's also something to be said about the beyond mindfulness more from the stages and how meditation might help improve the stages as well.
Okay. That's a kind of
interesting
reference
question.
to integral spirituality. Ken Wilber's
States
the
and
big voice on
stages.
this one. Of course, he's not the only one, but he's the one who's got the microphone, it seems. Meditation won't help you change stages. For that's an ego project. And so what meditation will help you do is see the fact that things aren't working as well as they could and have a better perspective about why they're not working than just his problem. Right? Now I see how I'm involved in it with how I've been constructed and built by society. So that you work on from an ego perspective. But the ability, the strength, and the power and the confidence to be able to meet those challenges, to grow and unfold, because no change in a person happens without a struggle. And nobody wants to struggle. So what meditation does is it gives you the strength, the confidence to meet the struggle, which is if you don't have that, it's very hard to make changes in the ego structure because you're afraid or alone or isolated. So the strengthening through meditation gives you the power to meet these challenges. But the challenges themselves that's involved in changing stages are ego work, and they can again be downstream or part and parcel of the meditation process.
I'm trying to think of some examples. I think for stages, a really great way to improve our stages is to experience alternatives, experience people or communities who are living in a higher stage. And I don't mean it's higher and lower, like that's a put down, but more evolved, more experienced, who've had the wherewithal to think about these things and cultivate alternatives, because part of it is very practical. Like if you don't know, you don't know. If you don't know how to do it, you don't know how to do it.
I have a metaphor.
I beg pardon?
I have a metaphor.
Well, and before we go there, I just want to say that is one of the purposes of Clear Sky. We really put a lot of effort into that. If we sort of identify some issues where we're not manifesting as what we think is 21st century awakening, then we try to build it into our infrastructure here, very, very pragmatically and also very socially. Like, let's us as a community of practitioners, let's undertake this practice together. And it's awesome.
Awesome.
It's so great.
Awesome.
And then people can see how it works and think, oh, I could do that, right? Or I want to be a part of that.
Okay,
What were you gonna say?
Well, I guess we should get out of here. Do we have time for my metaphor?
Yeah, please.
Well, let's consider life to be a music career. So you're 5 years old, and you go study piano with your kindergarten teacher. That's the stage. You got to start there. You got to start somewhere. And then, you get to grade 8 and I don't know what piano levels are, but anyway, you get that, there are levels in piano study. So you get to grade 8 and now you're what, level
12.
12? Is that the highest?
No, there's another one.
Well, okay.
I remember.
Okay, 6. You're at level 6, right? So you move through stages. You move through stages of piano development. You're a much better player. You're a much more complex player, right? You're not necessarily a better person, but we're talking now, this is a metaphor for life. So in this case, if the music lesson is mirroring the life, you're now a much better person, right? Because you have more compassion, you have more understanding, and so on. So as you continue to meet your stages, challenges based on your fears and your insecurities and your attachments and your clingings and your ego separation, you move into higher stages of piano mastery, right? Now you go up to 12 or however high it goes and so on. This is the chart of the line of development of music skill, right? So if you use that as a metaphor for life, this is why nobody wants to really be around people that are really awake, because it's not just about music, it's about your entire life. And nobody wants to admit their entire life needs work past 15.
Age 15,
13,
you mean? You're talking about the age? 15 years old?
8, yeah.
What age?
8.
Or
When did
piano
you-
level? I don't know where are we?
When did you stop listening? 5? 3? Now, where's your ego kind of not listening? 3
Right.
years old,
Yeah,
5 years
right.
old, 8 years old. So it takes great courage to realize my ego is 8 years old and not listening in order to move to 10, to 12, to 15, right?
That's really true.